What's the most horrifying/disturbing thing you've come across at someone else's house? Viewer edition. Story 1. The most what the F moment I've had was when I bought a cheap car off Craigslist in about 2003. It was cold as hell out, so he invited me in the house to sign papers, etc. We walked down the hall from the garage into the kitchen counter. There's beer cans, bottles, liquor bottles, and dirty dishes covering the counter. There was cigarette butts all over the floor, pot pipes, a bag of weed, and it stunk like hell. I looked up from that mess into the living room. There was a completely nude, very large woman sitting on the sofa smoking a cigarette with one hand buried between her legs. She just smiled and said, "Are you buying the car? I hope it treats you well." They both seemed completely not bothered that his wife was masturbating in a pile of filth when a complete stranger was there. He tried selling me his gaming system, but I just said no, grabbed the title, and left. They both seemed very nice, but completely unaware that the way they lived was effed up. Yeah, that doesn't exactly sound like the most welcoming environment. I have a sneaking suspicion we might have a few stories about folks who have dirtier homes, perhaps even hoarders, and I just like to remind folks that for a lot of people, this can actually just stem from mental problems, trauma and abuse manifesting, stuff like that. I don't know all the details, so I don't want to judge folks too harshly. I mostly have sympathy for them, but I will also say I don't like dirty houses. I had a little bit of that growing up at times, and now not a big fan of that stuff. So I would say clean is better, please. Story 2. Not the worst I've seen, but my parents and I started to empty my late grandma's flat recently. She was a bit of a hoarder, but very neat and organized, so nothing dirty or gross there, but we did find some funny stuff, including a plastic bag with a hole in it, where she had circled the hole and written "hole" next to it. About 20 pairs of old glasses, someone's baby teeth, whose? No idea. Strands of my dad and aunt's hair from when they were kids, a mummified and flattened frog kept in a box of old papers. I mean, the whole neat and organized and not gross thing, it's certainly different. I've known a lot of people who they like to just hang on to everything. Like, I can't get rid of that. I've been very much the opposite way. I've moved a lot in my life, around the country and the state and everything, and half the time when I move, I get rid of 75% of my old stuff. So I don't get that mentality personally. It's just not how I'm built. But I don't know. The fact that you had it all organized, I kind of respect that. Story 3. This is a very disturbing story, and when I told my husband too, he was appalled. Looking back, I probably was lucky to escape with my life. I went on a date with a guy when I was in college. When he was in the bathroom, I happened to notice his bedroom door was ajar, and I couldn't help but take a glance inside. All over his room, on every surface, there were decapitated doll heads and strange severed doll paraphernalia. Less to say, I left shortly after. I think back to that day, and it still kind of bothers me. Story 4. I used to work at a prison. A guy named Camo, don't know how to spell it, who was known statewide for an escape he did where he had a gun hidden in a wheelchair during a medical chain run. He refused to clean, absolutely refused. The guy had a layer of film over everything in his cell. He also constantly claimed people assaulted him despite purposefully having a cell so filthy people would instantly throw up if they entered it. Heck, halfway across the pod, even hardened correction staff would gag after the cell's bean slot was opened. Sometimes he'd go on a medical chain and the count room would cruelly put other inmates into the cell. We'd give those inmates enough chemicals to clean a pod and even gave cell fires a pass. Anything to clean it. Even the most racist, inmate-hating, scumbag, corrupt pig would get upset on their behalf. Story 5. My dad was always a bit of a slob, but I never noticed it as a child because my mom kept the house pretty tidy and I liked helping her do it. That was up until the divorce. It wasn't until my dad started living by himself did I finally notice that he was a slob. Well, one day during one of my court-appointed visits, I went to my grandparents' house and saw my dad living in the spare room in their basement. I went down there and crushed something under my foot as soon as I walked into the room down there. The room was so filthy and reeked that I never knew what it was, but my dad seemed to know. He flipped out on me and my brother for going into his room without telling him first. I'm sorry, but when you're a child and your grandpa tells you to go get him something out of the bedroom in the basement and hands you a spare key to get into said room, you go and do what your grandpa told you to do. Anyway, it's been a long time since then, and he is still a damn slob and has never cleaned up his damn act. Last time I saw his room, I thought I'd walked into a house from the show Hoarders or something similar. It was frickin' disgusting. You kids go and clean your room, and when you're done with that, go and clean my room. No, Dad! No! We already lost one of my siblings to your room, not another. Dad, you gotta set a little bit better example for your kids. Come on, pick yourself up. Keep going. Story 6. I was walking home from school once, elementary school at the time, and I saw someone changing their little kid in the middle of the street in broad daylight. Not changing diapers, changing clothes. I saw that and immediately walked an alternate route. It also happened earlier this summer, but outside my house. Neighbors' kids taught swimming. The mother seemed annoyed as I came home from work and parked in front of my house. Excuse me, lady, this isn't your street. Don't be flashing kids around here. Story 7. Story 25 reminded me of a college friend I had. Her room was a permanent mess. Clothes everywhere, empty bags, empty pop bottles, you name it. It was on this floor. Anyway, one day her justification for keeping her room a mess was that she really hated spiders and lived next to an open field, so they often got big spiders in the house. She reckoned it was okay to leave the floor like this because she could then hear the spiders coming in the night. Story 8. My mom has a friend who went to her friend's house. Something was definitely off, and she saw the mom on the couch. I didn't think either of them addressed each other, and she left the house without finding a friend. It was in the 80s/70s. She found out later that the mother was dead before she went in there, but the catch was that the mother's corpse was on the bed, not the couch. We still talk about that one. Story 9. When I was about 8 years old, I lived in a house that looked straight out of a horror movie. We had an unknown infestation of rats in our basement. Nobody ever went down there since the landlord we were renting from said it was off limits. One day our fire alarm went off for no reason and wouldn't shut up, so we called the fire department to verify all was good. They went into the basement and found mountains of dead rats scattered around everywhere, and there were even some that were still alive. This explains why we would see a rat in the house like maybe once a week. And on top of this, my mother's room had a beehive in it, and she just let it chill there and ignored it. She was a heavy drinker, so it wasn't a priority for her. Even our windowsills and every part of the house were just littered with dead bees and flies. So we had dead/alive rats and a bee infestation at the same time. Other than that, our house wasn't particularly messy. So the landlord must have been living in absolute filth in her half of the house for it to actually affect us that badly. We never saw how she lived, but I can only imagine. After being put at risk of contracting the bubonic plague and being randomly stung by bees many times, I hated my home life as a kid, and I resent my mother every single day of my life. I don't know why my mother let us live like that. Gross, 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 gross. Gross, because that's the landlord with like their part of the house. Any landlord in a place like a duplex or something that's not in like the best of shape and they're like, don't go into that room, don't move into that house. Why does the landlord have the creepy room that they're like, don't go there? And you're like, why? And they're like, don't go there. Get out, run away, go live somewhere else. Story 10. I used to consider myself pretty strong, as in I thought I could stand gross things. That was before I had the joys of cleaning out one of my grandparents' rental houses. The tenant moved across the country, and their buddies were supposed to collect a few large belongings from the house for them. The buddies instead used it as a hangout. There was fecal matter on the walls, in the toilet, in the sink. They had left rotten food on the counter, and for some reason, there was old breast milk stashed just about everywhere. Needless to say, gross. That's not even getting into the absurd amount of illegal substances stashed beneath their porch. Not an enjoyable experience to clean up. Story 11. So I've seen a lot of bad ones, 'cause I used to help my mom with a cleaning job. The worst one was a hoarder situation. Bad enough to be on the show. The woman was a single mom with 3 kids, and every single room was packed full other than a little path to the beds. The kitchen was nasty to the point Mom and I just said nope and left. We suggested she hire a proper cleaning crew, maybe some biohazard guys, because of the amount of mold and mouse crap we saw. They ended up getting booted out of the house, and it took about 4 months to get it cleaned. Story 12. These stories with the nasty nightmare house remind me when one summer I was working for a cleaning company in my town. We usually cleaned vacation homes and residential homes of older people who were not able to clean their bathrooms for obvious reasons. But one day on my day off, I got a call from my manager who asked if I wanted to go clean a house with them. I said yes because I was just fresh out of high school and needed some money to buy me a new car to commute. We ended up going to this beautiful house, and I was having high hopes for it being an easy bathroom cleaning. Lo and behold, as soon as the homeowner opens the door, I could see mountains of trash and random stuff all over the house. Even on the floors. I was mortified that the living room and kitchen looked like that, but worse off was when I headed to the bathroom to see piles of used toilet paper all over the bathroom. I talked to my manager and said that I was sorry, but I was quitting. $13 an hour was not enough for me to stay with the company at all. Yeah, I'm sorry. I absolutely agree with you. $13 an hour for that? I don't care if you were equipped with your own hazmat suit. Absolutely not. That's $100 an hour job if it's that gross. You should be getting hazard pay. Story 13. There was an old man who lived in my hometown. He would just drive around on his four-wheeler with his dog. One day we find out he's in the hospital. My dad, being the good soul he is, decides we'll solve the rat problem in his house if he ever recovers so he can have a nice reunion or whatever. I got dragged along for some reason. We open the door and his house is all the same color of green and black. His bed, fridge, floor, ceiling, everything. He has rat holes in his mattress. You open the fridge and it's all black and green. We set up so many mouse traps, and it wasn't uncommon to get 4 or 5 mice on one trap. Needless to say, when he died, I was so happy to see the town burn that place down. Cthulhu-looking mother fricker. Story 14. I have a story similar to number 3. I was checking out at Walgreens many years ago when I was suddenly hit with the smell of a rancid egg fart. I know I hadn't cut one, and there was no one else in line with me, so it could only have been the cashier. She must have noticed me sniffing because she started blushing and rushed through the rest of the transaction. Yep, it was her, LOL. I know fart guilt when I see it. Anyway, I pay and go out to my car, opening the bag right away to get out the chapstick I urgently needed. To my horror, the egg fart stench immediately filled my car. The cashier had bagged her fart up with my stuff. Thank goodness I hadn't bought eye drops. Story 15. My parents owned a rental house in a pretty sketchy town nearby. This one lady had 2 large dogs, I forget the breed, and lived there for a while. After moving out, my parents went to the house to prepare for another tenant and saw dog feces and urine everywhere. It smelled absolutely disgusting. They tried hiring multiple separate cleaning services, all who opted because of how disgusting the smell was. My parents ended up having to clean it and added a no dogs rule. You know, I tend to be pretty judgmental of any landlord that would dare have a no dogs rule because I myself am a bit of a dog person. I do feel like they're a little more justified after going through that. Just a little. Still not a big fan of landlords. Story 16. My parents would not close my bedroom door when I went off to college, and our dog would sneak in there and crap everywhere. My house growing up was a wreck for a lot of reasons, and this wasn't out of the ordinary, but going off to college shook me out of complacency. I was very frustrated with them for neglecting to shut the door. I work in carpentry housing rehab, fixing up student housing between tenants for my grad school. Our school has a lot of international students from across the world, lots of different cultures. One African student refused to use plumbing for some reason. He just crapped in the corner, usually in a bucket, but not always. An Indian family left, having paid a friend to clean out their house after they returned to India. The friend bailed on them, and the house was an absolute train wreck. Food left for almost a year in the fridge. Everything they owned was left, but it looked like someone picked the house up, turned it upside down, and shook it like a purse. They had several kids, and it was a 2-bedroom, 1.5-bathroom house, so it was crammed with stuff. We could barely walk. The fridge was black with roach droppings, and the floor around the fridge was also black. It looked like potting soil. Holes punched in the walls, a layer of grease that formed stalactites off the cabinets. We went to this house because it had created a rat problem for the surrounding units. It got missed in the paperwork somehow, so we didn't check it out till almost a year after they left. Yeah, that smell is stuck in my head. Story 17. My childhood home, which my dad still lives in, was a condo. The condo on our right was rented. At one point, the people who were living there were very dirty and disgusting hoarders. My dad has never really been clean. The sink was/is always filled with dishes. Stuff was/is always on the floor, etc. The people next to us had a roach infestation. The roaches moved to our house when they got kicked out. The roaches have never been gone since for more than about 3 months because of bug bombs. I absolutely hate it. I can barely tolerate being at this house. I hate living there. I occasionally do have to spend the night and help, but I can never do enough. Story 18. My girlfriend at the time asked me if I could help her middle-aged female neighbor move some stuff around in her house. Went inside, and it was a hoarder's paradise. Stacks of newspapers in the hallway, so you had to walk sideways. All rooms full of junk and actual garbage, which was the result of years of hoarding. The disturbing thing was, I found out later she had only lived there for 6 months or so. She had brought her hoard with her. And she seemed quite sane, even worked for the local welfare agency as a fraud investigator. Only 6 months. So yeah, couldn't have collected all that stuff in 6 months. So she had moved with it. The question is, did she get movers to help her? And if so, when they were bringing stuff into the new house and they were like, where do you want it? Did she have specific places in mind? Or was she just like, I don't think you understand, wherever? Story 19. Now, before we moved to the country and then to the house we live in now, we lived in the suburbs of Portland. Across the street from me, I had this friend who went to the same school as me named Ava. Me and Ava were good friends, and we were mutual friends with this other kid named Capri. So, Ava, she was bullied at school. The reason was because apparently she never brushed her teeth. I had nothing against her, and still don't. Maybe she wasn't taught or just didn't have a toothbrush. She didn't have as much money as we did. My dad earned a lot. So she had these crazy cavities. I felt bad because they must have hurt. They were on all her teeth, and they must have been quite painful. They were basically destroyed beyond the point of no return. Her breath wasn't the best, but of course I never mentioned it because I didn't want to be rude. And her house was insanely dirty. Not as bad as some of these, but the worst I've ever seen. It smelled, that's all I have to say. Last time I talked to her was 2nd grade, so maybe those teeth were just her baby teeth and she's doing better now. Story 20. Visited a friend during an argument with my parents when it was a 35 degrees Celsius summer. This friend had her moon cup out in the open, a used condom, and obvious mental illness mess. If you know what it looks like. Her roommates were not much different. A druggie who was staying on his U.S. father's money meant for studying, but he spent it on acid and opioids. Other was an alcoholic. Their bathroom was so bad I either used the shower with mushrooms growing on it or went to use a public one. The druggie one threatened to stab me because I made a small joke. A few years ago, he died from an overdose. I feel bad for his father who just wanted the best for his son. But now I am keeping my bathroom spotless due to fearing that mess I experienced. Story 21. My best friend always has a probably used corn cob in a visible spot when I come over to her 2-bedroom apartment. Always a good laugh as I'm a guy and she's a girl. The last time I went over, she had done a great job of cleaning up her place and was really turning around what was once an inhospitable environment. Roaches, dog poop and pee, trash, dirt, grime, etc. were mostly gone. Alas, we enter one of the 2 rooms where she sleeps, and she moves some clothes from off her bed for us to sit, and in the process, a rather large dildo gracefully slips out and onto the floor. Fortunately, my younger sister, who was hanging out with us, somehow did not recognize it, and my friend was able to move it out of view before anyone but her and I noticed. We traded my huge cheeseball grin for her wide-eyed, panicked smile and didn't mention it. I later told my sister, and it didn't even faze her. Keeping something like that within the covers of her bed, what kind of person does that? Everyone knows that you take it out, clean it up, put on a nice little mineral oil polish, and set it upon the stand in the center of your room surrounded by candles. People these days just don't put in the effort.
Story 22. My aunt is a hoarder. I love her to death, but every time I go to chill with my cousins, I have to go through rows, and I mean rows on rows of just useless junk. I sat on their couch once because I was eating pizza, and I cannot tell you the absolute horror that I had felt whenever I sat on something old and mushy. Not to mention, when I was a baby, my mom had left me over there, and my aunt let me play with my cousin. I'd wandered off when she went to go do something and cut my leg on a rusty nail. Story 23. I've been in some nasty places. The worst for me would have to be that I went to my husband's mom's house after I had spine surgery, thinking it would be easy to get around considering where we lived, we had to cross a swinging bridge to get to the house. I'd never been there before and thought they would be semi-clean, but I was way wrong. Outside was covered in junk, including cats. Inside they had 2 cats, and it was hoarded full of junk. In my mind, my jaw dropped. How could anyone live like this? It was late, and we drove hours from our house. I had just had surgery and wasn't in the best of shape to travel, so I was stuck there. I just decided I'll go to bed and leave as soon as possible, as we were sleeping that night. I kept smelling cat poop, but the smell would get stronger every so often. I couldn't sleep after that, so I lay there watching TV. The cat came climbing over a pile of junk in the back of the room. The pile was so high in areas it was touching the ceiling. I laid there and watched it crawl under the bed. Then, all of a sudden, I got a strong smell of cat poop. This cat was climbing under the bed my husband and I was sleeping on and pooping while we slept. I will never go there again. It was 2016, and just thinking about that smell, I could puke. How does someone live like this and not feel ashamed for letting it get so bad, and then allowing someone that just had a serious surgery come and stay without telling them their house is a staph infection waiting to happen? I wouldn't be surprised if they had scabies from living in it.
I am honestly kind of shocked that you didn't still want to leave. Like, I would have to be in a pretty phenomenal amount of pain to arrive there and not all of a sudden, like, within 10 minutes be like, oh my gosh, I forgot the medications that I'm supposed to take back at the house, and I have to take them every couple of hours and everything, otherwise, my heart's gonna explode. I'm so sorry, everybody. You know what, we'll just go home. I'm just gonna have to stay there. It's gonna be so late, but thank you so much. No, seriously, thank you so much. Goodbye.
Story 24. Not at home, but I worked as a dance instructor for a pretty big dance company for a summer. The break room was infested with rats. There was mold everywhere and packets of food that had expired months or even years prior. Being desperate for praise and extra money, I cleaned it all up and kept cleaning all summer. What I should have done was dumped it all out on the dance floor for the clients to see before quitting. I later found out that the owner and manager have no interest in the safety or well-being of their employees. Story 25. My good friend and co-worker has 3 guinea pigs. For the longest time, they were not cleaned up after, and it eventually led to every surface of their apartment being covered in hay or fur, not even mentioning the piles of garbage that covered nearly half of their apartment. The place eventually got so unclean it led to pest infestations that could have been spread to friends' places/work. This left everyone understandably furious that they, the friend, were not planning on informing anyone of this situation and were knowingly risking exposing others. I consider never talking to this friend again, as I have an extreme phobia of parasites/infestations, etc., and this was essentially my worst nightmare come true. In the end, they left the job after staff blew up on them for all of the above, but the home is much cleaner now.
Howdy, editor. We got mainly facts video 4 to 3. Do. Ba. Alright.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.